Welcome to today's main point with Harpreet Singh Toor. आप सबनू प्यार भरी सत श्री अकाल, नमस्कार, आदाब and shalom. Like every week on Tuesdays when I come, and I always think about, to try to get the information which is maybe something good news. But right now I think we are going through that cycle where good news we will have to wait. When I say about good news, I mean, some signs of ending the war in Ukraine, which affects every aspect of our lives, whether it is related to the supplies of the eating goods like wheat and sunflower, which is the main export from Ukraine, or the everything else which then down the road gets affected, which includes the oil supplies from Russia, because oil is the major product which is used to create the product. So what happens is when the oil prices are high, everything gets automatically, those prices gets factored into the cost of the commodities, and you and I, we end up paying higher prices, and that affects everybody. For the economists and the governments, it's the inflation. But whose fault is it that the inflation is there? It is not your or my fault. I'm not at fault and you're not at fault. And these are the events which actually make us pay through our nose. And we end up selecting between what to buy and what not to buy, what to put on the table, starting with the food and then miscellaneous items. You drive less, you go to less places, and it's that cycle which is not breaking since the end of COVID. And so when we really look at the things, we have to wait. We have to have the patience. I'm pretty sure that before us, there were people during World War I and World War II who went through the same aspect. I do remember 65 war with Pakistan and India, and 1971 war with India and Pakistan. In India, the inflation went through the roof, and in 71, which I remember like yesterday, a 5 paise on the mailing was added as a collection of funds for those army personnel, about 90,000 plus of the Pakistan army who surrendered in Dhaka to Jagjit Singh Arora, to have them have their food, taking care of them, their medical expenses, and connecting them with their families via phone at that time. And for an ordinary person, because the only media was to write the letters and communicate, so that 5 paise at that time, it was an amount. It may not sound that big today, and those people who are born after that, but at that time, it came in as a shock, because even if you were mailing out 5 or 6 letters, you're talking about 30 paises, and at that time, the income was between 200 and 300 a month, and out of that you are taking that chunk out, and at the end of the year you're talking about, let us say, even if it is about $12 or 15 bucks, not dollars, rupees, it was a substantial amount. So now same thing is happening because of the war, and indirectly we are paying for it, and whether we like it or we don't like it, OPEC, which is basically controlled by Saudi Arabia and other Middle Eastern countries, plus Russia is part of that, they actually cut the production of the crude oil by 2 million barrels a day, which means the price of per barrel went up, and that affects you and me directly, because what we pay at the pump is going to go up. Even though the Biden administration tried to talk to Saudi Arabia not to do it at this time, because they will be helping Russia with this increase, because Russia needs every penny right now for the war which Russia started. There is no doubt about it that Russia started the war. We can always discuss about the reasons why Russia started the war. There are different opinions. Russians have their own opinion. President Putin has his own opinion, and the rest of the world has own opinion. President Xi of China is quiet because his election is coming up, and probably he's not going to do anything. Definitely he's not going to do anything to the election. Even after the election, he may not do enough, because right now he is looking at China becoming actually a major player on the world stage, because on the Western Hemisphere it was United States, on the Eastern Hemisphere it was Russia, which used to be USSR. But now China is actually going to be the top player, because Russia actually is losing so much financially in this whole war. And the Western countries are actually united behind Ukraine to make sure that Russia does not gain even a single more inch. And as of today, Russia has less occupied land in Ukraine than what it had in February when it actually went into Ukraine. And on top of that, the big blow came in at the 70th birth anniversary of the President Putin, when that link between Russia and Crimea was with a truck full of ammunition exploded on the bridge, and it crippled the supply line, direct supply line from Russia into Crimea. And Crimea actually is one of the factors, biggest factor, which was annexed by Russia in 2014, and that is access to Black Sea. And Black Sea is the one which connects Russia with the rest of the world like other countries. So it may sound very confusing, very complicated, but for the people who do keep track of some international happening, they will understand it easily, that what's going on. And it is very important to understand that, because it does matter how these things affect. Now with the Saudi Arabia doing with the OPEC what they did, America, which has been supplying to Saudi Arabia all these weapons to fight against Yemenis, which nobody knows. A lot of people may even not know what the Yemen is and where it is. That actually, before I talk about that, there is something which just popped up in my mind. When I was in Indiana on this weekend, we were just standing and talking, and one of the guy who has his business in Arkansas, somebody came from India recently. He landed in New York, and this gentleman, he knew somehow, he came into contact with this guy. He needed somebody to work on his business in Arkansas. So he called the guy and he said, hey, listen, I need, I'm looking for somebody to work at my store, and do you mind working at the store? And he said, where are you? He said, well, I'm in Arkansas. And the guy replied, I paid hundreds and thousands of bucks just to get to United States. I just got into the United States, and you want me to come to Arkansas now? So the thing is, a lot of our people, they even don't know the states. Forget about everything else. They know New York, they know California, and nothing in between. And they know that, okay, we have to come from India to United States. And as we talk, the influx of Indians on the southern border is highest of any other nation right now. Well, anyway, going back to that. So Saudi Arabia was using the weapons supplied by United States for its fight against Yemen. So now that may become an issue. I don't know how much it will become an issue, because it's a very high level diplomatic thing, because when Khashoggi was murdered or killed by the agents from Saudi Arabia in their embassy in Turkey by inviting him into the embassy and then literally cutting him into pieces and shipping out his pieces from the embassy. Since then, there was a very cold-shouldered reception by the Biden administration to Mohammed bin, the current to-be king of Saudi Arabia, known as MBL. So what is happening now is that is where the issue stands, and how it will move further, we don't know. As far as President Trump was concerned, he was more concerned about dealing with the business. If I give you something, what will you give me? And I won't be surprised down the road if you find out that he gave out some of the secrets to Saudi Arabia to get a $2 billion investment to Kushner for his company from Saudi Arabia, which I haven't seen happening in any company anywhere in the world, which is actually something which I won't be surprised if we find out that there was a quid pro quo, and that is something which we have to watch. And also I want to mention that after the break we will have a guest who is assemblyman from New York State Assembly, and we're going to talk about the issues which affect the people who live in New York State and how that can also reflect on the national politics right after the break. Welcome back to Mainstream. Like I mentioned before the break, that after the break we will have with us an assemblyman from New York State Assembly. So we are going to discuss the issues which affect us literally. It's everyday bread and butter issues, and of course, like I mentioned about, we have inflation, we have all these factors which affect our life. So let us get the Assemblyman on line right now. Assemblyman Anderson, Khaleel Anderson, thanks for coming in and joining Mainstream today.
Thank you so much for having me, Harpreet, and good afternoon to you and to all of the amazing viewers who are joining us for this podcast tonight. Thank you so much for listening in and watching.
Well, let us jump right into the politics. We know that election is happening on November 8th, and we have this very iffy situation about the Senate, the U.S. Senate, and House is everybody is expecting to get flipped. But there are very few people who are holding out the hope that House may not even flip based on Roe versus Wade. What are your read on that, being deep into the politics?
Yeah, thank you so much, Harpreet. So for me, I strongly believe that we will be able to hold on to the House during this cycle. And my reason being is that the Congress, and even on the local level, has truly been focusing on, like you said earlier in your program, the bread and butter issues, making sure that we fight back against inflation, making sure that we address the rising crime levels that we're seeing across the nation in this moment, but also making sure that we're speaking to the issues of the moment, and at the top of many people's minds has been, how do we recover from COVID-19? And so with those three bullet points and those three levels of focus, I cannot see us losing the House, because we've made significant progress in those areas. It's not going to be an easy election. It's a very close margin. But I think that if our folks on the Democratic and Working Families Party ticket speak specifically to the working class issues, we'll see a Democratic House, and we'll retain the Democratic United States Senate, so that we can continue to do the work for working class people.
You know that the off-season election, the turnout is always an issue. Are there anything specific which are the steps which are being taken on the ground within New York State in particular and nationally, generally, so that the people can come out and they may come out and vote, especially after passage of some of the laws where the voting has been made more difficult as compared to making it easy for the minorities in particular?
Yeah, definitely for that, Harpreet. I think one of the things that I'm just talking about, what I'm doing to help other members of the assembly and other members of the legislature at large to help get that message out that we are the party that's focused on the average American, the average citizen, the average non-citizen. We are the ones that are focused on that. I think that one of the things that we're doing to make sure that we get the message out there in that regard is speaking one directly to people and going door to door, but most importantly, speaking on the issues in a wide range, and three, most importantly, we're getting people to understand that these are the two choices we have here. We have a party full of folks who are election deniers, folks that are making it harder for you to vote, and then we have folks that are working actively to pass the New York State John Lewis Voting Rights Act, for example, to make it easier and more accessible for you to vote. So if you want the party that is taking away your rights, you'll vote Republican. If you want the party that is enhancing your rights and looking at ways to holistically address the needs of our neighborhoods, you will vote with the Working Families Party and with the Democrats. And so that messaging is what we're trying to help resonate to our constituents.
And also there is, there is something, which I always talked about, but nobody probably was assessing the way I assess some of the things. Even though the Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts said that, Supreme Court is not ideologically either to the left or to the right, but we know what is happening there. We know that. So with this voting redistricting on the table with the at the table and on the agenda with the Supreme Court, based on your community's experience, your experience, what should we as a minority expect from the Supreme Court when they give a judgment on redistricting based on this case from Alabama, I think that case is, which is in the Supreme Court's docket this year?
Yeah, I definitely have to look into that case more. And it's really hard to judge this court in terms of precedent around redistricting because the way the court is currently constructed hasn't dealt with very little, if at all, any redistricting cases. But if we look at the politics of the Supreme Court, we can say that this case may swing more towards the favorability of those who drew the districts in Alabama. Think of it like this. How can you have a state of like Alabama that a quarter of the population is African American, but yet they only have one representative in the House of Representatives? And if you're looking at it through the lens of fairness, the Supreme Court should be on the right side. But if you're looking at the lens of politics, the Supreme Court will most likely be on the wrong side. But I can't judge it off a redistricting precedent, but I'm judging it off the precedent of the court as a newly political entity, which it generally had not been. And that's arguable in and of itself.
Well, that is true. The question for me also comes in, which you also know, that New York State Assembly redistricting process is going to go back on next year also, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So that happened because somebody upstate put in a case and they actually threw out the original redistricting, which was which gave more representation to minorities as compared to what we have right now. So what do you think is going to happen in this redistricting process when it happens next year?
Yeah, thank you for that, Harpreet. So I'll just say that the redistricting process this time around on the state level really could have been a process that was more inclusive, and it could have been a process that ensured that communities of interest were kept together. And I think that the Redistricting Commission did do what they could with the constraints that they were given to carry that out. But there was always more that commission could have done in that regard. And so to that end, just adding on to that, I'll call you back. Just adding on to that, excuse me, I think that with this process, it will go back, as we saw in the Supreme Court ruling on the state level, that this case will go back to the Independent Redistricting Commission. And the commission had listened to a lot of the concerns, but the commission could not agree on one set of maps. So that was part of the problem in and of itself. So when I say the commission did all that it could with the constraints that it was given. Now our hope is that these folks go back to the drawing board and they work together and put something together that ensures that communities, that have been left behind and forgotten about for far too long, can finally have a voice all across the state. Now, it's not going to be perfect. I don't think anything that the redistricting folks do, whether it's the legislature, LAT 4, redistricting, whomever is in charge of the process, I don't think it's going to ever be perfect. But if we can continue to chip away at inequity, we can make a difference for future generations.
Yeah, that's the whole point, that nothing is perfect, but as long as we are moving towards the right direction to make the system more equitable to everybody, that's the whole aim of redistricting after the census, right?
Absolutely.
And that's what we are looking for, as a part of the minority. Both of us belong to minority communities in this country, and we definitely look for our own seat at the table. And definitely I got to give you a credit that the way you won your seat and you reached out to the minorities who are not even part of your district, but that they are, they should have their seat at the table. You reached out to beyond your own district to the communities. And that is something which I got to appreciate. And I know we are going to go for a break, but after the break, we are going to talk about two very important issues. One is law and order, because what is happening, and also what is happening actually, when the bail law reform, when it happened, the effects of those bail law reforms are not positive the way we assumed they will be. And that is something, which I definitely want to touch the bases. But before I walk into the break, there is something which I would like you to tell us about any particular special agenda which is right now we should expect, which will be passed in the New York State Assembly before the end of the year.
Harpreet, which budget?
No, budget I know is as of 31st of March, but anything before the end of the year, before 31st of December, any particular thing which is on the agenda right now with the Assembly, State Assembly?
Yeah, I don't foresee the legislature coming back or reconvening before the legislative session in January.
Okay.
But I could be wrong about that. We've seen special sessions and extraordinary sessions happen. Actually, when I came in 2020, in December of 2020, we had an extraordinary legislative session in December of 2020 to vote on the extension of the rent.
And that's why I'm saying, because we are still coming out of the COVID, election is there, and we have a couple of projects, which the governor may ask you to come in for a special session. Is there a probability of that after the election?
It's probable. And I have to say, I don't see it like immediately, but I'm saying it's highly probable just given the precedent that's been set with this COVID-19 pandemic and how many times that we've had to do extraordinary sessions. Just in the short 2 years that I've been in the legislature, we had December session in 2020. We had a July session this year to deal with firearms. So it's been, very hard to judge. So you could be right. You might be predicting the future.
Another question, of course, is with the gun law, even though Assembly passed, that's why I'm asking this question. The gun law, which was passed by New York State Assembly to have gun-free zone like Times Square and some other sensitive areas, it has been again thrown out by the court. So We are going to go for a break. After the break, I want an answer that how you are looking at it, that how Times Square can be safe from the people where, or conceal and carry will be there, and we don't know who is going to carry the guns and where, whereas New York City used to be one of the safest city at one point, but it's not there anymore. So we are going to go for a break right now. After we come back from the break, I want you to answer that question. Welcome back to Mainstream, and like I mentioned, we have with us New York State Assemblyman Khaleel Anderson, and we're talking about the issues which affect us. All right, Mr. Anderson, the Assemblyman, let me have your answer on the conceal and carry gun law. What can be done by New York State Assembly so that the people can feel safe when they go to Times Square, instead of looking over the shoulders that who is next to you, who has concealed weapon, instead of enjoying the Times Square. So that is something which we are looking. Somehow people come to me and ask, and I'm asking you the same question here.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Harpreet. Can I give your viewers just a little context?
Sure, of course, of course.
Yeah. So, the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, made a very dangerous decision to strike down a 100-plus year statute that we've had on the books since the early 1900s to allow New York State to do what it feels is safe as it relates to gun ownership and concealed carry. And so when the Supreme Court struck down that very, very important statute, we acted as the legislature within less than 30 days to pass legislation that would create sensitive zones, or safety zones, if you will, of high traffic areas across our city. Now, we know our state, our cities, we know our state better than the Supreme Court ever can. And so we know it doesn't make logical sense for people to have access to firearms in high traffic and high concentration areas, period. So we crafted a law based off of the Supreme Court's ruling to ensure that New Yorkers can feel safe, and that we respect folks who have a right to the Second Amendment, but we do so while balancing common sense public safety, right? We don't want folks on the train legally or illegally traveling with firearms, nor do we want confusion about what the law is. And so what we did was we clarified the law. And what happened, unfortunately, a few weeks ago was that a federal judge in Syracuse, I believe, upstate New York, struck down portions of our law that we passed in July, which recently went into effect, I believe, in August, September. And it's dangerous. One, it brings confusion to our constituents and to our communities. And two, it brings another element of concern to our communities who are already in a heightened sense of security and safety, and are looking for that security and safety, and are looking to us as their elected leaders for that security and safety. So what we've done in response to that was the governor and the attorney general are looking to put a stay, or have a stay on that ruling, pending further review to our highest courts here in New York State. Right now, this is a case that's in federal court, but the state is suing to create a stay on that. But the bottom line is that we ensured that we were constitutional in our approach to working around and working within the Supreme Court law. And so we want to balance public safety and the rights for folks to carry safely, legally. But we also do not want to put our city in a heightened sense of fear. And so right now, as we're seeing the Attorney General and the Governor suing to put a stay in on that ruling by the federal judge, we have to ensure that we just follow, what the rules are presently, and just, stay on top of this issue and this matter. We want to make sure that, yes, we're focusing on legal gun owners, and making sure legal gun owners know their rights and regulations, but most importantly, illegal gun owners in making sure that they are not carrying concealed or at all, because we don't need unlicensed firearms, in the hands of the wrong people, which can create additional fear for our neighbors. So this is going to be a challenge, and we're looking forward to making sure that things come out in our favor.
And especially, two things which I will mention. One is ghost guns. And number two, Second Amendment, yes, I understand that, that you want to go and hunting. When I was growing up back home in India, I used to go hunting with a 12-bore rifle. But why do I need AR-16, which is basically an assault weapon to fight the enemies? So that is something, which baffles me, and the people I talk to, they are also surprised about how Second Amendment is being turned upside down. Instead of having the hunting privileges, it is like the men are being hunted down with these guns instead of hunting. So do you really expect that this whole thing may end up again in the Supreme Court down the road? The New York State versus whatever this judge from Syracuse mentioned?
Yeah, I do think that some elements, and thank you for that question, Harpreet. I do think some elements of the law that we pass may end up making it to the Supreme Court, but it's really hard to say at this point. I know that I trust our state's attorney general to work with the federal government as we're suing them in this regard, to figure out, what is our best and most safe option going forward. But it's a challenge. It's really a challenge. It's hard to answer that question. But I do trust our attorney general to ensure that we fight to make sure that we are balanced in our approach here.
See, that's where that special assembly session comes into play. If something comes up, you may get a call that, okay, we are going to do this thing immediately so that we can take care of this issue. Going into,
We're always
because
on call, Harpreet, 24-hour job in some instances.
we are heading into the holiday season, and any particular steps which the state assembly, state senate, along with the New York City, they are taking for protection of the vacationers who may come to Times Square to enjoy the Times Square?
Yeah, the mayor's office has been very communicative to our offices as legislators. As the process goes along, when we enacted these laws in July, they ensured that we knew when and what, and they made sure also we had proper advertisement in Times Square and in other places. I know that at the epicenter of these changes to the laws that we did back in July has been Times Square, but I want to remind folks that the sensitive zones are schools, are daycare facilities, are trains, and many other sensitive areas where weapons should not be. And so we're going to do our best to work with the mayor's office, whose NYPD will have to enforce these regulations, to ensure that we get the proper information out. Because like you said, as we go into the holiday season, I'm thinking about December 1st, December 2nd, when the Rockefeller tree is lit in Midtown.
Yep.
And all of those high traffic events and programs that are happening across the city. I'm thinking about those events, and I'm thinking about, the bigger picture and looking at how we can ensure that not just New Yorkers are safe, but those who are visiting New York feel safe as well.
Well,
So
like
we have a lot of work to do and get that messaging out.
exactly, like Assemblyman mentioned that the sensitive areas are not just the Times Square, but the schools, the subways, and playground areas, Yankee Stadium, Met Stadium. Those are all sensitive areas. So we're going to take a break, and after the break, we will be right back. Welcome back to Mainstream, and we are actually running into our final segment of today's Mainstream show. And like I mentioned, we have Honorable Assemblyman Khaleel Anderson with us, and we are talking about the issues which affect New Yorkers in particular and United States in general. So let's bring back our Assemblyman. Assemblyman, we just, last year, the bail reform laws were passed, and that reforms are being abused by certain people. Is there anything being relooked or being looked at from this perspective, that where the judges can have more say when somebody is brought in front of the judge by the cops? Because what is happening is when you talk to the cops, they say that we arrest the person even before we get into our car, the guy is already out on his or her own recognizance to that the judge has to let the person go because of this new law. Is there anything on the cards which may make the judges to make a decision on certain offenders who are repeat offenders to look at them differently than first time getting caught?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Harpreet. You know, this the bail reform laws conversation has brought a lot of angst and confusion to a lot of some of your viewers and listeners, but for folks across the city. And I want to, in the limited time that I have, I want to set the record straight about the bail reforms themselves and the two rollbacks that the legislature has done on those bail reform laws to respond to some of the concerns that people have been having. So if I can just give folks some context.
Yeah, that's the whole point. That's why I asked you this question, because even in my mind, I'm still not 100% clear about what's happening.
Absolutely. So just to give some context, the core of the bail reform laws was that in New York State, we need to have a state that executes justice in an equitable and fair way. And prior to the 2019 original bail reform laws, there was two justice systems that existed here in New York State. One for the rich and those that can afford bail, and one for the poor and those who could not afford bail. The individual that is able to get out because they have money is no less dangerous than the person who cannot get out or can get out if they do not have the means or resources. So money stands in the between safety, in some people's minds, between safety and the actual, execution, of justice, right? We want to make sure those who are doing the wrong things can be rehabilitated and can be reformed and can be held, most importantly, held accountable for their actions. We've seen that punishment by itself doesn't work, but there has to be rehabilitation and accountability. Both of those things have to work hand in hand so that this person doesn't repeat offend. And so I will talk about the bail reform rollbacks that we did in this year's budget, because folks, I assume, are aware of the first rollbacks that happened in 2020. Now, I want to say that the first rollbacks, however, did not even get a full chance to be enacted before those 2020 rollbacks. With a lot of media and a lot of attacks on the actual understanding of the laws, scared the legislature to roll them back, and then scared the legislature to roll them back again in 2022. If we look at what the laws say, if we look at criminal procedure number 216, Penal Code 216, and I'll send you the actual language.
I will love to have that. I will really appreciate if you can get me that. Yeah.
We'll send you the language of the things that we did in the rollbacks, which I'm concerned about because it takes away from the essence of making sure that we have two separate systems. But let's take guns, for example, right? Before the rollback, judges have discretion and always had discretion and continue to have discretion. In fact, their discretion increased under the recent rollbacks as it relates to gun offenses and repeated gun offenses.
Okay.
In the rollbacks, it's a Class E felony to illegally be carrying a firearm, and the second time the judge has discretion to remand. What we're seeing, and that's just gun issues. Now, when we talk about the other points that were rolled back, pre-arraignment detention, when we talk about discovery reform, and when we talk about the involuntary commitment that we did in the budget for individuals who are struggling with mental health issues and might commit a crime, as you know, who are folks who are severely mentally ill or mentally ill and might commit a crime as well. As a part of that, we rolled back Kendra's law, which is a 20-plus-year statute.
Hold your thoughts. Let me interrupt you. We have about a minute left, so I want you to wrap up your answer in about a minute. I'll bring you back, then we'll further discuss into it.
Yes, because I want to dig this deeper into this more, because all in all, what I'm saying is that we have done enough to ensure that the courts are clear, that officers are clear, and every entity outside of the legislature are clear on what's enforceable and what's not enforceable. And we've done our best to make sure that we don't have two systems of justice, one for the rich and one for the poor. We want to make sure people are being held accountable, and I want to talk more about what we've done in this last set of reforms so that people can feel confident that we're balancing common sense public safety as well as the need for people to be held accountable. There is a balance.
Thank you. That is something, which we need to discuss further. There are other issues which we need to discuss. For them, I'm going to bring you back on the show down the road.
I'm happy to come back.
I really appreciate you coming on the show and discussing. It's very important that people like you, the young people who reach out beyond their own district boundaries to interact with the other minorities, so that those people, they can understand what is at stake and how they can be at the table even though they are not at the table. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Harpreet, and thank you for empowering me as your elected official to continue to be the voice for the voiceless.
Thank you very much.
Continue to lift up people who are left behind and forgotten about.
Yep, thank you very much. And with that note, actually, our show is about to finish, and we are going to wrap it up here. Hopefully, we will have a much better the holiday season coming up, which is important for us and everybody else. Until next time, good night and good luck.